Hello, welcome to this feedback session for Edexcel International Advanced Level English Literature on the Summer 2024 series. We're going to be looking at each of the 4 literature papers in turn, thinking about candidate performance and hearing feedback from examiners. Paper 1 examines post-2000 poetry and prose. Here's a reminder of what this paper involves. There are 2 questions, both equally weighted, 25 marks each. Remind students to avoid spending too much time on question 1 and think about timekeeping during the exam. The next couple of slides are looking at some general comments on section A from the principal examiner. Always remind your students of the importance of assessment objective 2 in section A. They should be consistently analysing the writer's craft. Weaker responses tend to focus more on meaning rather than on literary analysis of the poems. We're now going to look at an extract from a level 2 response, that is a general response. The extract's continued on the next slide. So this response is tending to summarise the texts. It's describing a few structural features, but it's rather sort of sitting above the texts themselves, making general comments and fairly broad and generalised comparisons. The clarity and detail of a level 3 is not there. So for level 3, there needs to be consistent analysis. This whole response was awarded 9 marks in total out of 25. Now take a look at exemplar A in the accompanying booklet. This is a response to question 1 from the 2024 summer paper. The candidates had been asked to compare O'Driscoll's Please Hold with another poem looking at the presentation of frustration. When you've read it, have a think about the strengths and weaknesses of the response and think about where you might place it on the assessment grid. So exemplar A was awarded 19 marks out of 25, placing it near to the top of level 4. It's a strong response that consistently displays discriminating thinking, both about the named poem and the selected poem. Strong and discriminating connections are developed between the 2 texts, and there is some detailed consideration of the methods the poets use and the ways in which these contribute to a sense of frustration. There are moments when the ideas appear sophisticated, but this is not sustained, and so the mark remains within the level 4 range. Here are some examiner comments on question 2. Eat Me obviously was a very popular choice, and candidates tended to link it with poems such as An Easy Passage and The Map Woman, and some really effective comparisons with Giuseppe and The Deliverer, and of course Chainsaw versus the Pampas Grass. Quite a few candidates commented on the initial sort of age-weight confusion in Agbabi's presentation of the cake, and some identified the source of the words eat me as coming from Alice in Wonderland. It would have been good, however, to see fuller consideration of why this reference to Lewis Carroll might be significant. Here's an example from a level 3 introduction. This response was awarded 12 marks overall, and it's typical of a level 3 approach. Clear and relevant, but not conceptual or discriminating. The candidate is explaining the poem with examples rather than assessing or evaluating the writer's craft. Take a look now at exemplar B in the booklet. This is a response to question 2, where the candidates were asked to compare Agbabi's Eat Me with another poem and think about the presentation of harsh experiences. When you've read it, consider the strengths and weaknesses of this response and think about where you might place it on the assessment grid. In the event, exemplar B was awarded 21 marks out of 25, which places it towards the lower end of level 5. This candidate offers a detailed and thorough reading of the named and selected poems. Both texts are consistently and meaningfully connected. Throughout the discussion, there's developed and at times sophisticated consideration of the poet's methods. Although this isn't consistent, there is sufficient evidence of sophistication in the response to warrant the award of a mark in the bottom of the level 5 range. Here are some reflections on Section A from the Principal Examiner. A reminder to centres how important it is that students have plenty of practice in carefully selecting the choice of second poems. Also a reminder that AO3 on context, that is not being assessed in Section A. And finally, a reminder about the importance of sticking to the rubric. We're now going to move on to Section B, Prose. Note these general comments on this section from the Principal Examiner. Here are some comments on question 3 that asked about destructive behaviour in the kite runner. Again, as with Section A, remind students of the importance of Assessment Objective 2 in this section. They should be consistently analysing the writer's craft. Characters ought not to be responded to as real people, but rather as constructs of the writer. Question 4 on social status in the kite runner was the more popular. A reminder that engagement with context is being assessed on this section, but it's very important always to link contextual comments with the text itself. Here's an extract from a typical level 3 response. It was awarded 13 marks overall. The candidate clearly has knowledge of the text and of context, but rather than analysing the writer's craft and considering the links between context and text in a discriminating way, we have a pretty straightforward explanation of contextual points with relevant links to the novel, but nothing much beyond that. Now take a look at exemplar C in the booklet. This is the response to question 4, where candidates have been asked to explore social status in the kite runner. When you've read it, think about the strengths and weaknesses of the response and consider where you might place it on the assessment grid. Exemplar C was awarded 18 marks, placing it securely in level 4. It's well controlled, it's discriminating, it makes wide-ranging reference to the text throughout. Comments perhaps lack the sophistication we would expect at level 5, but many level 4 criteria are being met. Here are some examiner comments on the questions on Life of Pi. Remind candidates of the importance of integrating their knowledge and understanding of how contexts affect the text in this section. The White Tiger is one of the less popular texts on this paper. Encourage students to avoid answers that are wholly focused on characters in the novel. Even where a question specifically asks for an analysis of a particular character's function, due regard must still be given to the writer's craft and to the context of production and reception. Encourage students to avoid psychoanalyzing characters. Again, very similar comments are being made on the responses to Brooklyn. AO2 is clearly an area for development. Now take a look at exemplar D in the booklet. This is a response to question 9, which asked about the presentation of isolation in Brooklyn. When you've read it, Think about the strengths and weaknesses of the response and consider where you might place it on the assessment grid. In the event, exemplar D was awarded 22 marks, placing it securely in level 5. This is a sophisticated response that demonstrates sustained analysis of Tobin's craft. The next 2 slides look at comments on the responses to Purple Hibiscus, a popular text on this paper. As with many of the other texts, the issue here was some candidates' failure to address assessment objective 2 and explore the ways meanings are being created in texts by writers. Here's an extract from a typical level 2 response to question 12. There's a great deal of narrative recount going on here, with the candidate telling us about the characters with limited textual analysis. It's very much a general response, keen to summarise the story, but with little discriminating analysis or sense of the writer at work. The overall essay was awarded 9 marks. Take a look now at exemplar E in the booklet. Again, this is another response to question 12, where candidates were asked to explore the presentation of acts of rebellion in Purple Hibiscus. Have a think about its strengths and weaknesses and consider where you might place it on the assessment grid. This exemplar, E, was awarded 20 marks, placing it on the border between levels 4 and 5. It's a very strong response, slightly let down, however, by some weaknesses in expression, but nevertheless it offers a discriminating analysis of the writer's craft and of the novel's contexts. Here are some final reflections on section B of paper 1. We're now going to look at paper 2, the drama paper. Here's a reminder of what the paper involves. 2 questions, 25 marks each, both equally weighted. Again, advise students not to be tempted to spend too much time on question 1. The next few slides look at general comments on the paper from the principal examiner. Responses to drama texts ought to go beyond analysis of simply language alone. Encourage your students to focus on how the dramatist creates meaning for the audience through use of plot and structure, patterns of imagery and symbolism, characterization, conflict, staging considerations, setting, dialogue, props, lighting, sound, and so on. Note the importance of assessment objective 5 on this paper. It's very important that students are fully prepared to explore critical views on their chosen play and are able to discuss these with confidence. Questions 5 and 6 on Twelfth Night were both popular questions. The next 2 slides show an opening to a level 3 response to question 6. The full response was awarded 12 marks. There's a clear and relevant handling of the text, but the candidate is explaining the text in a somewhat laboured way. The discriminating assessment that we would expect for level 4 is not there. Now here's an opening to a level 4 response to question 6. The full response was awarded 18 marks. Right from the start, the candidate signals engagement with both the question and the context in which the text was produced and received. We can clearly see that an argument is beginning to be shaped. There is already control and some discriminating ideas are in evidence. Dr. Faustus is another popular text on this paper. Note that comment on question 8. If a student elects to answer a question on language or structural features, they must remember that contextual and critical ideas still need to be addressed. Othello continues to be the most popular text on section A. Here's an opening to a Level 3 response to question 9. It's clear and relevant, but it's explaining rather than analysing. The full response was awarded 14 marks. Take some time now to look at exemplars F and G in the booklet. These are responses to question 9 from the summer paper. Candidates had been asked to explore the presentation of the relationship between Othello and Desdemona. Discuss the strengths and weaknesses of these responses and think about where you might place them on the assessment grid. In the event, exemplar F was awarded 10 marks, placing it at the top of level 2. It's mostly general in approach, using a few quotations from the text, but not achieving the consistent analysis required at level 3. On the other hand, exemplar G is an example of a level 5 response to this question. It was awarded 22 marks. Death of a Salesman is one of the most popular modern plays for study. Here's an extract from a level 4 response to question 16. The full response was awarded 16 marks. Note the early focus on the dramatist's craft and the link to the question about honesty. Now take a look at exemplar H in the booklet. This is a response to question 16, where candidates had been asked to explore the presentation of honesty in Death of a Salesman. Think about the strengths and weaknesses of the response and consider where you might place it on the assessment grid. Exemplar H is a level 4 script that was awarded at 19 marks out of 25. A Streetcar Named Desire is a hugely popular text on this paper. Note the examiner comment about the strongest responses never losing sight of the dramatist at work. When you have a play with psychologically engaging characters like Blanche and Stanley, the temptation for some candidates is to discuss them as real people rather than as literary constructs. Here's an opening from a level 3 response to question 17, which asked about the complexities of Blanche's character. The full response was awarded 14 marks. It's clear, and the candidate is clearly aware of the dramatist at work. However, it's fairly straightforward. It's not a conceptual response. It's mainly Blanche is doing this, Williams is doing this, Blanche is this, Williams is doing this. There isn't that discriminating approach that we would want for level 4. Here, on the other hand, is an opening from a level 4 response to the same question. The full response was awarded 16 marks. What this candidate does is show us that they have a sense of Williams' overall purpose and has responded to that in a discriminating way. Here's an extract from a level 2 response to question 18, which asked about the dramatic impact of telling the truth in A Streetcar Named Desire. The full response was awarded 9 marks. There's lots of narrative recount here, but there is some general understanding. However, the candidate is tending to list characters and tell us about them rather than offer analysis of the writer's craft. Take a look at exemplar I in the booklet. This is a response to question 18. Have a think about its strengths and weaknesses and consider where you might place the response on the assessment grid. In the event, exemplar I is an example of a sound level 4 response. It was awarded 17 marks. There is a tendency for weaker responses to questions 19 and 20 to have focused perhaps too much on context at the expense of looking at Beckett's dramatic craft. Note these comments from the Chair of Examiners on the importance of addressing the writer's craft. This is a recurring theme, obviously. There is an expectation at A level, that students really ought to be going beyond word level analysis. Particularly with drama, they ought to be considering dramatic craft, staging, and so on. It's also noticeable on this paper and on WET04 that many candidates seem to get caught up in word level analysis, probably more appropriate to the study of poetry. They seem hesitant sometimes about Shakespeare's dramatic craft, and that's something that centres ought to work on with students. We're now going to move on to look at paper 3, which is unseen poetry and prose. Here's a reminder of what this paper involves. There are 2 questions with different weightings. It's very important, therefore, to advise students not to be tempted to spend too much time on question 1 and leave plenty of time for the 30-mark prose question. Here are the principal examiner's comments on the unseen poetry question. It's recommended that centres continue to make use of the sample assessment materials and past papers on the Edexcel website in order to become even more familiar with the assessment requirements. The mark grids demonstrate how candidates can progress from one level to the next. In order to achieve level 4 or above, responses need to be discriminating, critical, and evaluative. Analysis of the poem should be controlled and well supported with evidence and close reference to the techniques used, and should provide examples of the nuances and subtleties of the writer's craft. As the principal examiner points out here, a chronological approach, going through a poem line by line, is not a good idea. Here is an extract from a borderline level 2-3 response to question 1. It was awarded 11 marks overall. Notice there's no shaping here. The candidate dives straight into line-by-line analysis. Now take a look at exemplar J in the booklet. This is a response to question 1 that asked candidates to analyse the poem Monologue for an Onion by Suji Kwok Kim. Look at the strengths and weaknesses of the response and consider where you would place it on the assessment grid. In fact, exemplar J is an example of a response on the level 4-5 border, just not quite sophisticated enough to move into level 5. It was awarded 15 marks out of 20. The next 2 slides are the principal examiner's comments on section B, the prose section. It's clear that taking time to plan an answer before putting pen to paper is a good idea. Science and society is a hugely popular theme on this paper. Note the comment on question 6. Candidates need to keep a clear focus on the question. Here's an opening to a level 3 response to question 6. It sets off on an explanation of the background to the novel. It's not addressing the question directly. The response overall was awarded 16. On the other hand, here is an opening to a level 5 response to question 6. It was awarded 22 marks. Notice how this candidate is immediately focused on the question and is making links between the use of setting and the writer's overall purpose. This is a good example of a candidate setting out to integrate a sense of both craft and context. Have a look at exemplar K in the booklet. This is a response to question 8, where candidates were asked to compare the ways their chosen texts on the women in society theme present social convention. Discuss what you think are the strengths and weaknesses of this response and think about where you might place it on the assessment grid. This exemplar, K, is an example of a level 5, a very strong level 5. It was awarded full marks. Here are some overall thoughts on paper 3 from the principal examiner. You might like to share these with your students. We'll now move on to Paper 4, Shakespeare and Pre-1900 Poetry. Here's a reminder of what the paper involves. There are 2 questions with the same weighting. Remind students not to be tempted to spend too much time on question 1 and note the presence of Assessment Objective 5 on both sections. Here are some general comments on Section A from the Principal Examiner. Question 5 asked about imagery and symbolism in Hamlet. Here's an opening to a Level 3 response to question 5. It got 13 marks out of 25 overall. Clear, relevant, but not discriminating. Here's a much stronger opening to a Level 5 response to the same question. It got 23 marks out of 25 overall. Read exemplar L in the booklet. This is a response to question 6 that had asked candidates to explore the presentation of Gertrude in Hamlet. Think about its strengths and weaknesses and consider where you might place it on the assessment grid. In the event, exemplar L is an example of a Level 2 response, general at best. It was awarded 8 marks out of 25. Many of the examiner's comments from Paper 2, the drama paper, apply also to this Paper 4. It will be worth centres reviewing some of those comments. But now we're going to move on to Section B, which is the poetry section on Paper 4. Here are some of the Principal Examiner comments on this section. So take a look at exemplar M in the booklet. This is a response to question 10, where candidates had been asked to explore mood and tone in Donne's song and in one other poem. Think about the strengths and weaknesses of this response and consider where you might place it on the assessment grid. Exemplar M is a Level 5 response to question 10. It was awarded 23 marks out of 25. Note how this candidate manages to address all 4 assessment objectives, in particular how it integrates contextual and critical ideas with analysis of the writer's craft. Question 11 asked about the presentation of timelessness in Keats' Ode on a Grecian Urn and one other poem. Here's an opening to a Level 3 response to question 11. It got 14 marks out of 25. It's a clear but sort of line-by-line approach, not conceptual. Finally, look at exemplar N in the booklet. This is an extract from a response to question 11, again on Ode on a Grecian Urn. Think about its strengths and weaknesses, consider where you might place it on the grid. Exemplar M is an extract from a Level 5 response. It was awarded 22 marks out of 25. Note how it manages to address all 4 assessment objectives, in particular how it integrates contextual and critical ideas with analysis of the writer's craft. Here are some final thoughts on 2 important assessment objectives on Paper 4 from the Principal Examiner. Thank you for listening to this webinar. Do get in touch with us at Pearson to find out more about ways to support your students in their English literature studies.